Hi, everybody. I'm Corey Lott, and today we get to discuss three essays by John Dewey, Jane Addams, and George Counts. I have about 7.5 minutes of summary information for you and then some discussion questions. And I look forward to seeing how your discussion goes in class, and I hope you enjoy. So this is a question that I think all three of these essays seek to address. And this question is still obviously crucial for us to be asking and examining today. Effectively, what is the function of education? So we got to read John Dewey's Pedagogic Creed with 5 articles, each starting with "I believe that." Um, he has a really admirable clarity of conviction and ability to communicate his ideology in a very compelling manner. And he defines education as a social practice where learning is centered around the natural interests and aptitudes of individuals, and their social interactions are the most important. And what teacher would not love Dewey with this quote? Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. It counters Bobbitt and the social efficiency thinkers who believe the purpose of education is preparing for a future job or function. And in this sentiment, Dewey really raises the process of education to a place of esteem and paramount importance. So when he speaks about subject matter, this is his Article 3 of the Creed. He's talking about it connecting to students' real lives, and he promotes this idea that learning content through constructive activities is the way to go. And then it's interesting because the 3 constructive activities he offers are cooking, sewing, and manual training. So there's these moments in this essay where things have as much importance today as they would have, say, 100 years ago. But then in these moments, you realize, oh, okay, there is a time difference between this writing. So I'm thinking maybe these constructive activities now would be experiential learning and solving real world problems, that's how that would have moved into the modern era. He talks about the nature of method, and this, of course, is where the inquiry method is born here. He's one of the fathers of that movement, and it's something I use in my curriculum and my teaching. It's really very important, so I'm grateful for that. And he is merging the psychology with the sociology. So emotions are important, and it's important to analyze feelings and how feelings affect learning. So I really appreciate that as well. And then there's Article 5 here, where schools are really considered to be the place where social order is developed, and teachers are given that responsibility of that formation. So he asks teachers to have the dignity of the calling to follow through in this charge of creating basically what society will be. So obviously there's a whole lot more that could be said about Dewey, and it will be interesting to listen to your class conversations about what you found to be most interesting in his writings and most relevant today. We're going to move on to Jane Addams. What a woman. I wish I would have known more about her earlier in my teaching career. She is very inspiring. She moves to Chicago in the early 1900s, and 3/4 of the families are immigrant families. And she immediately sets up social services. So everything from healthcare to paying attention to what's happening with education. And she is the first woman to win the Nobel Peace Prize in social work as well. So her focus is really looking at immigrant communities. From Jane Addams, we got to read The Public School and the Immigrant Child. And she brings up this tension that we still see today in society of people coming from the old culture and settling in the United States and having children, and then the differences between that new generation of children growing up in this new country, this new culture, this new world. And she's discussing what that looks like in society. She, at this time, is even recommending that these, she calls them immigrant colonies, be bridges, find a way to bridge them and the schools. That there's this wealth of cultural knowledge out there, and they need to be brought into the schools and shared. So she's this early proponent of cultural literacy and diversity training that we see now fairly strongly in our schools. And she's another one who really believes that education is extremely important. So here she's saying that education and health of the youth, including the immigrant youth, are crucial for the survival of an effective social democracy. One of the sentences in the article I found most interesting was that she says arrests among children of immigrants are twice as large as the number of arrests among children of native-born Americans. And I tried to go back to the Pew Research Center and find these statistics from the early 1900s, but I wasn't able to find that in a neat and tidy chart like this. But what we have here on the right, this is from October 2013, Pew Research Center, and we're looking at crime rates and age. And we see that the first generation has a much lower crime rate than the native born and second generation children. So it is not the same today, if this was in fact what was happening then. There's also, a lot of discussion about the myth of immigrant crime that we've had in our culture as well. So I just thought this was kind of an interesting thing to compare, and these were interesting statistics to consider. Here's a discussion topic for you and a few questions. So if you want to pause the video and maybe divide into groups and discuss and then come back to share. I like working in smaller groups. I prefer that sometimes. It makes it easier to get to know people. So if you want to break up into partnerships or threes, or I don't know how it works online if everybody online wants to end up in one group, but I hope you have a good class discussion and then report back to each other. Last we have George Counts, and we read Dare the School Build a New Social Order. He's influenced by Dewey and the progressive education and critical pedagogy theorists, and his belief is that also schools are crucial for the socialization of youth, and teachers have to gain courage to take power. He's another one that would be very empowering for teachers. One of the most interesting sentences I found in the reading was this one here. We live in troublous times. We live in an age of profound change. We live in an age of revolution. One could say that of this time we live in right now. And so I find that to be very relevant between the two. But he also concludes there is hope. And then he gets quite radical in his thoughts as far as suggesting collectivism and more socialist principles. And I really liked very much his sentiment here that schools must become centers of the building and not merely the contemplation of our civilization. So education must have some type of function. He's very socialist in nature and believes that schools and resources should be used for the benefit of the masses. He offers near the end this stark warning that collectivism is the only way to preserve democracy and to ward off the dangers of economic individualism. And he talks about the inequality and feudalism that would happen without this type of collectivism. And I just wonder if Counts were alive today, what he would think of how society has evolved. You could argue that we do have collectivism of some of these resources, and you could also argue that there is perhaps a modern day feudalism if you take into account the gross inequalities that we have in society. So I found his article also quite thought-provoking as well. On the next slide, I have a few different discussion questions, and hopefully Professor Eng will guide the discussion. And again, I really look forward to watching the class and hearing what you have to say. There were so many incredible ideas in these three writings, and I really did just have to summarize it. So I look forward to the extra detail that you will all discuss in class.